And welcome, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Sorry, there's like this one of those huge mosquito things flying around. So if you see me like darting around like this, that's why. Um, Thanks so much for having me, Tyler. It's a pleasure to do this, and thank you for those who are here for making time on a Saturday afternoon. Um, yeah, so I'm going to jump in. I got the feeling, Tyler, from our conversations ahead of time that you want to talk about some pretty serious stuff. So I thought maybe to offset that a little bit, I'd read maybe the most frivolous part of the book. Um, what you need to know if you haven't read the book is that this is taking place after the narrator's brother's wedding, and he is putting off going back to his graduate program in Virginia and staying in a tent on the terrace at his brother's apartment in Brooklyn. Um, and at the wedding, at his brother's wedding, which was on the terrace, uh, his aunt named Karen sneezed in his face. And that's something you need to know. And what else do you need to know? So, yeah, he's just trying to decide whether he's going to go back to graduate school, whether he's going to continue trying to be a writer, or whether he's going to do something else because it's all starting to feel a little bit stupid. Okay, so for days afterwards, I felt like I was at the threshold of an insight I wasn't quite prepared to face. I spent the week after the wedding on Owen and Noah's terrace in one of the better tents. Each night I built a fire where Owen and Noah sometimes joined me, treating me with the kindness you show a rescue dog. I told them the thought of returning to Virginia was a cold terror. I described my classmates' weird and self important habits of speech and mind, like how they were always saying the words liminal and diachronic. Do you think you feel such contempt for them because you feel such contempt for yourself? They asked. Or do you feel such contempt for yourself because you feel such contempt for them? If you don't go back, they asked, what will you do instead? Go to Paris? Join the circus? Take a silk screening class in Tulum? I didn't know exactly. These were difficult questions, and the temperature sank lower each night, so mostly they left me alone, staring into the flames or breathing hard into my zippered tent with a sense of foreboding drumming in my ears, a sense of foreboding that was actually Karen's cold coming over me, to outpace which in the daytime I compulsively walked the streets, unrecognizable though they were since I'd moved away. With demented tenacity, to escape the flocks of paralegals in their v-necks and the baristas smoking self-importantly at the curb, I walked over the Williamsburg Bridge into Manhattan, over the Manhattan Bridge back into Brooklyn, over the Brooklyn Bridge back into Manhattan, back over the Williamsburg Bridge again at nightfall, hoping to recover a sensation of fullness, that anamnestic intoxication, as Walter Benjamin put it, that I felt more or less continuously when I first moved to New York, and that the novel I'd spent most of the years I'd lived there writing as an elaborate attempt to record. I still knew the code for our building on Havemeyer, so one night I climbed the stairs to the roof, where the view no longer looked out over the skyline but had a barrier of steel and glass. All week, I'd been getting worried emails from classmates and professors, I told Ella, and I realized I'd never had any intention of disappearing from school, of abandoning our things and starting a new, more serious life, and so I would have to slink back to the life I already had. The following Saturday, therefore, I drove through a storm and hours of traffic west into PA, south down I-81, back east out of the mountains, to be at Helen and Adam's wedding, whose decision to marry likewise related as much to matters of immigration as to matters of the heart. I missed the ceremony at Town Hall and arrived late, with a smudged tie, a low-grade fever, and a runny nose, to the bar where the reception was being held, and where I found the bride's parents, the bride's brothers, her many cousins, and uncles and aunts, who'd all arrived that day, giddy with the thrill of being gathered together so far from home. They'd already been so proud, I'd been told by a ruddy aunt, Aunt Sue, a charming woman in her 60s who didn't once sneeze in my mouth. They'd all been so proud already, Sue said, to have one writer in the family, and now here they were with two. I must have grimaced. It's a fine thing to be a writer, she exclaimed, gesturing around the room. Someone has to make sense of all this mess. You know, I said, Helen is the only person here who likes my work. She always stands up for me in class when the rest of them are tearing the flesh from my bones. This was true. In class the day before I left for my brother's wedding, Helen had made a little speech on my behalf. We could all agree this character was flailing, she said, and his fascination with geopolitics, with injustice, with his wife Odil's suffering, and with the ferocity of her body's needs was a way of repudiating the blitheness of his existence and borrowing from the world around him the makings of a heavier, more meaningful life. I didn't know if this was true exactly, or I hoped it wasn't, and I didn't bring it up with Aunt Sue. I'd been avoiding thinking about it since it happened, but now I remembered how in class that day, hearing Helen's lone voice come to my defense in this way, as the rest of the room straightened their backs in their wishbone chairs, I'd been overwhelmed by gratitude, and tears sprang to my eyes, which I concealed in my usual manner by keeping my face close to my notes and my cap pulled low over my eyes. Sue smiled and raised her glass. It's a fine thing to be a writer, she repeated. Not that you'd catch me dead. Sue dragged me onto the dance floor, where in the course of an hour, she and I worked ourselves into an ecstatic sweat. And it was maybe an effect of the good feeling she imparted that, though I was still uneasy among my classmates, I found as the night went on that I was very happy to look around and see them in their best clothes, picking lint off each other's jackets, straightening each other's collars, steadying themselves on each other's arms. I felt an admiration for the hope they shared, words to describe which I couldn't find, though I thought I might have better luck the more I drank. To that end, the bride and groom had advanced a massive sum of cash against the bar tab, a sum, it soon became clear, we wouldn't make it even halfway through if we didn't get serious, as Helen put it, standing on a bar stool in a stirring address to the gathered crowd. Indeed, the bride in her lovely white dress made it difficult not to take this duty seriously, and she took it quite seriously herself, periodically ordering more tequila shots than there were mouths available to drink them, and taking it upon herself to drink the balance, a pattern that had been developing for a few hours when I found myself part of a small, cross-eyed group of wedding guests to whom she was explaining, with poise and authority, why she was no longer wearing her dress in the usual way. Having gotten on the outside of so many tequila shots, she said, I went into the women's bathroom and vomited all over the outside of my dress. But because I didn't want to appear in photographs of my wedding day with vomit visible anywhere on my person, I thought it would be better to turn the dress inside out. The inside of my dress, which is now the outside of my dress, is vomit free, especially relative to the outside of my dress, which is now the inside of my dress, and which is absolutely covered with vomit. It was here that she flipped the front of her dress to illustrate her point. This was when I knew for certain you'd love Helen, I told Ella on our walk, because later in the year she and Helen did in fact become dear friends. The vomit, she said, I told Ella, which until recently was inside me, is now being smushed by the outside of my dress, which is now the inside, against the surface of my skin, which is for all intents and purposes the outermost extreme of my existence. A state of affairs, point being, she'd have to tolerate for the rest of her life. Stop there.
Thanks, Chris. That was excellent. I was totally not the section I was expecting to hear you read, and um,
I,
is very
um,
is very delightful. And there's definitely something in that metaphor about the interior and the exterior, but I'm not sure I have my finger on it. That's like playing through the whole book. But yeah, so I really just want to reiterate how much I like this book. You know, it has a lot going on. On the surface, the book is about a couple who's trying to become pregnant, and we know that from page one, and that really is provides kind of the beats for the story as we move through the book. But the narrator is also trying to answer this question for himself, whether he knows it all the time or not, of whether or not what he's deciding to do with his life is worth it or not. Like whether or not writing is worth it. I mean, like the beginning of like the end of the first chapter in the book ends with saying, I knew that I would need to start writing all this down. And it's like that's what brings us the book that we're reading. But throughout, there's really this question, like in a bit of what you just read, you heard it as well. Um, of questioning whether or not that's the right thing to be doing with your time. It is devoting one's life to reading, writing. Is it is it does it have a utility that, or even a morality in a sense? So I guess what question am I looking for? I'm curious to you personally. What do novels do for you, like as a reader? Like, why do you turn to spending your life reading novels and writing them? What do they do for you in kind of a utilitarian way?
I mean, honestly, in like the most basic way, um, they're just one of the things that like makes the world a tolerable place.
Yeah.
Um, like I just wouldn't want to live in a world, and I think that's where there's a long. I think there was a period in the years that this book describes, 2014, 15, 16, where the the pursuit of career writing fiction started to feel like not just a waste of time, but somehow like a like some kind of moral failure. And I think a lot of people felt that way about fiction around that time. And I think that what I came to is just basically like I just wouldn't want to live in a world where there weren't books to read. It's just there's just no better way to get access to like another person's mind, I think, than to spend, 200 or 300 or 700 pages in like just paragraph after paragraph of their silly little thoughts. So
Mhm.
that's basically what it is for me.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I'm curious too, like, so the book is about the narrator of the book is pursuing an MFA in fiction. They're often writing things down, taking notes, but also connecting what's happening in the narrator's life, their personal world, to what's happening in the external world. So even from the first, maybe it's the first page of the first chapter of the book, we're learning about this personal struggle of trying to become pregnant with the narrator and Ella, his wife. Um, but we're also kind of tracking many of the particulars around the financial crisis in Greece at the time. And it almost seems a little bit random at first to me, like from the outside, just because like, well, I remember that happening, but I don't really remember much about it. Why was this financial situation in Greece so important? And maybe you can speak to that. But in more general terms, I'm wondering like how you decided what external things in the world to bring into the novel as you went through, or these were just the things you were paying attention to, or, and again, I'm going to fall into this trap a lot in this conversation of conflating you with the narrator, but
That's all right.
yeah,
It's
how
not
do you
worth
go
getting
about?
tripped up each time to correct it. So just
Right,
just roll
yeah,
right through.
right. Because you would describe this work as like auto fiction in a way, yes or no, or do you don't
Yeah, I
think?
mean, I would, but I wouldn't. Like, I definitely do, in my mind, preserve the distinction between the narrator and me. I don't
Right,
think I'm
yeah,
quite as clumsy or clueless as
yeah,
he is.
sure,
Plenty
right,
clumsy and clueless, just not that bad.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So
but
yeah,
and also just a lot of it is made up, being a
right,
novel
right,
and all.
yeah,
So I wouldn't want to get credit for any of the
yeah,
stuff he does either, if any of it's cool somehow.
right, right, right. So, what is it that what is it that kind of drives the narrator to decide what belongs to what needs notes taken about
Yeah,
it, what needs researched, what is deserving of going out on the street and interviewing people about what's happening right now. Like I don't know, I'm just interested in this dichotomy between the inner life of the narrator and the external world, which are often within the same paragraph will be shifting from internal thoughts to what's happening in the news to something that happened 2 years ago or last night, like the temporality of the Bucks moving a lot. I'm just wondering, yeah, kind of how you make those decisions, or maybe it's just natural. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, like, I mean, to take the Grease thing as one example, like, on the one hand, like, that was a moment where I think a lot of people who pay attention to these kinds of things, like a lot of people who live in Brussels, for example, would say that it started to feel like the wheels were really coming off the bus in Europe. Um, but I think for the narrator at that moment, like, he's an American, and like he does like, as an American, he just doesn't have a concept of how much goes on in the rest of the world
Hmm.
and how sort of dire the stakes are, for those goings on. So I think just suddenly being confronted with it feels to him, like, yeah, just kind of like the stakes are being raised on his own existence somehow. And I think that, I mean, that's one of the things that in the part I just read, Helen is getting at in her critique of the work that he's bringing to workshop, is that, like, he's trying to borrow some kind of authenticity from this sense of, like, heightened, uh, or this, like, sense of proximity to, um, a world where, yeah, like, the stakes are a little bit higher, things are a lot more interconnected. So I think that's one thing. I think, a lot of it too is just because of that, he's in this state where, like, he's just kind of soaking everything up, and everything goes in the notebook. Like, there's not everything is in the book, but, like, that character is writing down every single fucking thing that
Mm.
happens to him and every thought that comes into his head, because it all feels like, you know, um, earth-shattering.
Hmm.
And, uh, so then what goes into the book is just sort of like, uh, it feels random, I guess, because it's kind of a random, sampling of that, like, collecting that he's doing of just shit in the world.
Right, right. Um, Yeah, I'm also interested to maybe talk a little bit about journalism because many times throughout the book, the narrator is engaged in this kind of man on the street type journalism, like just going out in Paris. It almost seems like sometimes it's a way of practicing fluency with the language to just like speak with people on the street and try to write down what they say and respond and follow up. Um, but there are some I find those scenes pretty engaging. And though it doesn't open with a scene of that in the on the first page, it mentions that the narrator is doing that with there's a coming heat wave and they're out on the street interviewing random people about how they plan to cope with the heat wave. And then later in the book, there's protests in Paris, and he's out there with the notebook interviewing people. I'm curious, like, what your interest is in journalism. I know you studied journalists, and I wonder where you think the line between journalism and fiction writing. I don't know. Not like obviously I know where the line, or I think I know where the line is, but I don't know. Did you what do you skills or what techniques of the journalist do you use in writing fiction that you find useful or if any?
Um, well, I think that kind of man in the street stuff that he's doing is an aspect of what I was just talking about, which is like he's having all these sort of big feelings about what's happening in the world, and he's like, "My God, people are going to want to know about this. I got to get out there, and know, I have to document what's happening out there." And so I think, like, that that stuff is in the book for that reason. It's just sort of an aspect of, like, this self seriousness that he has, about, like, being a writer in Europe. And but in terms of, like, the actual journalism that went into the book, I mean, a lot of it's, like I interviewed people. I interviewed, quite a few people about various things. Amina, who appears in the second chapter, is one. There's a real Amina, and real Amina wanted me to use her first name uh,
Mm,
in the book, although she doesn't really, temperamentally resemble the character at all. I'm quick to point out. Um, but yeah, sitting with her for just talking for a few hours about the work she does for Human Rights Watch, about her experiences growing up in Sarajevo, and um, so that's one thing. Another thing is like, yeah, actually doing some of that man in the street stuff, going and talking to people when you know, um, like there's a terrorist attack or something, or a big march, or a uh, like hostage, or some kind of a siege event in Charlottesville. Like,
right.
um, so some of that stuff is just um, like, yeah. I mean, I was just doing some of that stuff because I don't know. I was trying to figure out like a new way to think about writing fiction at that time, and that was one way, was like actually go out in the world and talk to people. And I also just at that time wanted to be doing journalism more than I wanted to be writing fiction, which is why I was always getting eaten alive in workshop, because people would be like, "Yo, there's like 3,000 words about the Greek financial crisis in your short story. You can't do that."
Yeah, right.
I'd be like, "But I want to. I want to get rid of the story stuff, and I just want the analysis."
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah,
um,
definitely. And it makes me curious. It brings up another thing that I had written in my notes, which was about, I think the book is somewhat about this in a way, and I wonder if you've learned, I don't know, maybe some rules or some personal practices for how you use use other people's stories in your fiction. Because one of the plot lines in the book does revolve around, it's very subtle that it's going on. It's kind of like, it doesn't extend throughout the whole book, but the idea that the narrator's wife meets a woman, Amina, who you were just talking about, and relays her stories of um, her adventures with Amina, but also all of these really personal conversations that have happened with Amina. The narrator's wife relates to the narrator through emails, which are in French, and then he
mhm,
translates them and really kind of dives into this story. It really feels like the book even shifts from being in third person to being in first person during this part of the in this section where we are entering like Ella's experience of this person, Amina. So he prints out the pages of the translated emails, and they're found in a printer by Helen, who I love that you read that section because it reminds me that Helen and Ella become really great friends at some point, and that probably has
yeah,
something to do with their intimacy, I bet. But yeah, that it introduces this question of like whose stories are stories to tell. Like, is it there's a lot of things that happen to the narrator in the book that don't make for like amazing stories because they don't have like this perfect narrative arc or this great blow to the end of them. Like the Declan Foster story, for example, it's like kind of interesting, but there's not like a great ending to it. But
mm,
these other people's stories, like Amina's story or like Marco's story about uh, the Sarah Hope character. These are
mm,
other people's stories that are brought in, and they have just such an immediacy, authenticity, but also like a really delicious narrative arc to them. So it's hard to be like, no, I can't use that story because someone else told it to me. But I don't know. How do you think through that when you're putting this book together? Uh,
yeah. I mean, I think
Plus,
that
I
is
know
one of
that.
the like. I think that's one of the central questions for me. Like, I guess maybe to divide it into two parts. For me, as the writer in the real world, if it's a story that I'm not just making up, and it's a story that someone's told me, or I've gotten, secondhand or third hand through someone else, like I'm gonna ask that person if I can use
Mhm.
the story, and um, that's like kind of non-negotiable. I mean, the if it's a public event that was like in the news, then that's fair game as far as I'm concerned. But if it's like something that someone told me in an intimate context, in a private context, or told someone else in a private context without the expectation that it would go into a novel, like, yeah, I'm gonna ask them.
Mhm.
Um, that but within the book, it's like sort of an open question throughout. Like he's dealing with that. And it's something I think like as the book goes on, he starts to adopt that ethic as well, that like there's certain things that he's not going to share. There's an important moment where he's describing um, the experience of someone who was in one of the towers during 9/11, um, and he says in the book like, but that's not my story, that's his story, so I'm not going to tell it here.
Mhm.
And none of that's meant so much as like virtue signaling as to set up the fact that like the one person who really deserves that consideration from him, of all people in the book, is Ella, and she's kind of the one person who doesn't get it. Like he just
Mhm.
kind of assumes that he can take uh, all these really private and traumatic things that have happened to her and um, try to turn them into some kind of art to redeem them. And um, that like so he needed it needed to be in the book that he was aware that doing this to other people was fucked up, so that when he does it to Ella, like there's no excuse,
Right.
except yeah, there's no excuse. So that I mean uh that's sort of how I was thinking about it as I was writing.
Right. And that was the tension I felt throughout the book too, is that Ella doesn't often seem very interested in what it is that the narrator is writing, and almost is a little bit dismissive of it. And it yeah, this question of like, when is it gonna come to a head where she wants to be like, what is it that you're working on? What are you doing? I'm thinking a little bit of like Jack Nicholson, like or
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
Playmate. This is like, what are you doing down there? Like, our life is kind of like spread out transnationally because you're pursuing an MFA, and what's going on behind the pages. So um yeah, I thought that was really rich in the book. So
Yeah, I think that's true. I think he's also projecting that because he again has that insecurity of like he feels like he's not a serious person.
mhm,
Um and so I think he's also like projecting onto her a little bit of his contempt for himself.
mhm,
Um but yeah, she's also like you've completely upended our lives
right.
for this, so like it better be good.
Yeah.
But also you better not be writing about like my body trauma.
Right.
Um
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know.
And like, there are times where she addresses him very directly about the fact that he's not paying enough attention to her kind of feelings and experiences in the moment. Like, not that she wants to see that reflected in the fiction, but like, you know, there's something she clearly wants to tell him during the scene with where the narrator is kind of play by play watching what's going on in the neighborhood as police are surrounding a house where somebody is holed up inside the house. It has a weapon, and yeah, it's kind of a dramatic scene. But like, she has something to tell him, and then the the phone call gets disconnected because the phone dies, and then throughout the rest of that day, she's trying to get in touch, but he's kind of like, I don't know if he realizes it or not, but is like not paying enough attention to what's going on in the most important relationship in his life. And but taking lots of notes about this kind of crazy guy down the street who's gonna be on local news for one day, and that's it. So there's this, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's that pattern throughout the book of him always he's always paying attention to something like elsewhere, and he's never really looking at what's right in front of him.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I think that's a genuine frustration that she has throughout the book that
Right.
I don't know, makes a lot of sense to me. I'd be mad too.
Yeah. Right. Um, I'm gonna jump to a question here that Ben sent in. So Ben
Hmm.
asked, did the novel structure emerge organically in the writing of it, or did you have a clear roadmap for it from the outset? And maybe you can just,
Um,
for if anyone hasn't read the book, if you can just give a kind of an overview about it. It covers a very specific period of time, and then the book is written from the perspective of being in the pandemic, I believe. It's like the world is kind of
yeah,
locked down and looking back at this maybe 2 year period or year and a half period.
yeah, really, it's just about a year. It's so the book takes place from summer 2015 to summer 2016. So like historically, kind of the Greek financial crisis to sometime just after Brexit, I guess,
Hmm.
um, and just before Trump. Uh, so the way that the structure of the book kind of came to being was that I'd written a version of the first chapter in third person for workshop in my first year, and I wrote it right after, I wrote it in 2015, right after the period that it described. And then in 2016, I wrote a short story in the first person about the summer of 2016. And then I had to like come up with a thesis. And I was like, oh, well, these are the same characters. And this is kind of just like opposite ends of the same story. So why don't I just fill in what's in the middle? And that would be a book.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was sort of where the structure came from. I had to rewrite the first chapter, obviously, um, to put it in the first person. And then as I finished it in like 2018, and I was rewriting it. I rewrote it during the pandemic, and I was like, oh, that'll be actually a good framing device if he's looking. If it's now a few years later, if the character doesn't know in real time what's happening, what's coming, um, but the like narrator from the point of storytelling does, then it kind of gives just a little bit more dramatic tension. And then obviously the reader knows that it's going to get even worse. Um, so that was sort of where the structure came from. It was kind of baked in from the beginning, and then uh, that framing kind of came to me after.
Hmm. Great. Thanks, Ben. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw them in there. I want to ask possibly an irrelevant question, but I'm curious if like the word that oftentimes in this book, like I found such like a refreshing authenticity and honesty that would maybe be described as other people as cringe. Has anyone talked about cringe in this book? I don't know if you kind of have a feeling about that, but like because you were saying the narrator is kind of um hapless doesn't seem like the right word, but at times the narrator is kind of a dumbass, and like I can see myself in their narrator a little bit. I'm sure some other
Mhm.
folks can as well. But there's moments in the book that you really have to sit with things being cringy. They just are just like, wow, I'm beat for beat watching people in the neighborhood stand around while cops like fail to put up police tape around a tree, like it's taking them too long to do. And people are standing around watching football games on their phone and talking to one another and saying things that you wouldn't want like people to know are being said, but everything's being written down. So there's this like verisimilitude almost with life that creates a bit of a cringe. To me, it's like a delicious thing to read because I'm like, yes, this is the way people really are. But I don't know. I don't know. That's not a question. It's just kind of an observation. Is that I found some cringe in the book, but I loved it. I don't know. Yeah.
You mean like just the that like people in the book are behaving badly
Right.
and not getting away with it.
Yeah. Well, right. And that you're deciding, I feel like that you're intentionally not kind of buffing out the rough edges on that. You're just like letting it be on the page, like
Hmm.
exactly what, yeah, I don't know, the way people talk and the way they,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I think, I mean, to me, like that's what I'm interested in
right.
as a writer, and also just as like someone in the world, like that moment, with the with the standoff. Um, I'm not really interested in whether the police are going to barge in, whether the guy's going to start firing. I mean, I'm interested. Like, I definitely want to be there if it happens. I don't want to miss it. But like,
Yeah.
I'm much more interested in what's happening while people are standing around waiting for that to happen. And
Hmm.
there's a kind of bloodlust. There's also a kind of like weird. There are a lot of weird class dynamics and tensions that develop in a scene like that, and a lot of like there's a lot that is kind of like there's just like a lot of freighted stuff in like the way people's sympathies are expressed, and um it's just like a lot of people are out of their houses, uh milling around in the suburbs, which isn't like what the suburbs are really for. So it kind of like it's this opportunity to see people interacting in a way that they never really do. So to me, like you know that's why I go to a scene like that, is to hear, just to see what's going to happen
Right.
among. I mean, crowds are fascinating for that reason. Like you get a spontaneous crowd, and like you're just going to hear people say some of the most demented shit, and it's going to be great. Like
Yeah, and I
um
mean that's another quality of the book that I don't want to undersell is just how funny it is because the details that you capture feel so true to life, and they sometimes do have that effect of making me cringe a little bit, but I'm laughing at the same time because um, yeah, it just feels so honest. But the cringe part too is like a little bit of embarrassment, and I think maybe why in that scene I feel a sense of embarrassment for kind of like I didn't grow up in the suburbs necessarily, but I definitely like understand that culture, I think, is like there's in a few pages, I think before this, we are recounted the scene when Ella is in direct proximity to a real terrorist attack, even texting the narrator talking about people in their social circle who have been victimized by the terrorist attack as it's happening. Like shots are being fired as the texts are coming in. So this is she's experiencing something having to do with gun violence and whatever else in a neighborhood community directly. And in America, we're like, oh, somebody's got a gun in the house. Let's go stand outside the house to watch to make sure we're there when the firing starts happening because we got to see this shit because then we have a story to tell. It's like, uh, it's embarrassing because it's like, yeah, I guess you said bloodlust before too, but there's this kind of like, um, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of sick that America's like
yeah.
we're desperate to like experience that stuff, but we don't have the skills to deal with it. Like we don't actually want it. Once we catch that car, we don't want it.
Yeah, that's a particularly American scene, I think. Like people kind of on a Sunday in their pajamas, like milling around outside the police perimeter
Right.
as a guy's got like is like sending not TikToks, what Vine videos of himself with like a Tech 9, like
Right.
from inside the house. Like the the social media part of that was also like a fascinating aspect, because people are there like reading his social media stuff while it's happening. And so
Hmm.
then there's like this meta layer, and um but don't sleep on the French. Like the French at a in a spontaneous crowd, they're kind of just as wild and weird and like
Yeah. Okay.
awful.
Right. And
I
of
think
course,
it's a human thing.
tragedy with gun violence happens in America on a daily basis as well. So it's not like those
Yeah, yeah,
tragedies
it's
don't touch us, but there is this sense of almost like wanting to be near a tragedy or be within sight of it, to have seen it but not have it affect you. And I don't know that that's possible, you know.
yeah, there's a cavalierness to it. And I think what you said just now too is like that there's this like need that we have to like be proximate to these events when they happen, not just like gun violence, but any kind of, or like the terrorist, the November 13th terrorist attacks. I think that was something that I remember seeing and that comes up in the book is like um all of a sudden on social media, like you see all these people who are like kind of posting uh in a way to like broadcast their proximity to the events, like they had just been in Paris or
Right.
this was their favorite neighborhood of Paris, and like um and I think there is something that happens when you know when a tragedy happens, like there are a lot of emotions I think that animate people in those moments, but one of them is this like sort of perverse need to be close to it and to assert their closeness to it
Hmm.
publicly. And
Right.
so I think that's something you see in that scene at the police standoff as well, is like people want to be there so that they could say they were there when
Right.
when shit started popping off.
Right. Yeah, it's dark, but it reminds me of some a painting that I saw at the in Buffalo, that was reflecting on um, the shooting at the Tops that happened in Buffalo a couple of years ago. And the painting was of a Facebook post that said marked safe, like marked safe from this thing, but they
Hmm.
had edited, I mean, they painted it so it said marked safe from a street I have never been on. And it's like saying like, I'm okay, everybody. And it's like, well, yeah, because this isn't a neighborhood you would have never stepped foot in. It's like a very kind of like, I don't know, privileged or classist response, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That's exactly what I'm describing, is this
Right,
like um and social media obviously uh encourages that and rewards it. So
right,
um and I think that was one reason that event, uh that November 13th attack, like really brought that home, was like um it happened like it unfolded on social media. It was like something everybody
right.
um experienced on social media, which isn't, I can't think of like an earlier example of that quite on that scale. But anyway,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I just wanna, oh, let me see. Okay, we did get to that. Um, I guess I would like to also talk a little bit about one of my favorite parts from the book, which I think is on a much lighter side, though it does kind of describe human pathology in a delightful way and maybe a sick way. But this type of catfish story that happens with this character Marco. He relates it at a party, and the narrator puts it down. But I was thinking a lot about this scene because it tells this story of a group of guys who live together, and one of the guys in the group creates a fake Facebook account and basically forces all the guys in the house to fall in love with this fake Facebook account, and they become really obsessed. And the comedy of this is really great, and keeps ratcheting up. The story moves really quickly. Um, but I was thinking about it because recently I think there was an interview with Mark Zuckerberg where he was talking about like one of the answers to um, our social isolation and all the depression in the world is that every Facebook user should have a chat bot, like or an AI, basically somebody to talk to. And I don't know if he necessarily described it as a therapist, but like basically to have an online fake friend, and that might help with social cohesion and to fight isolation. But this story really argues against that, I think, because of how crazy people get when they are, yeah, uh, it,
Yeah, well, I think that's that's one of the things that like Yeah, one of the things that the internet has done to us is it's like put us in this position where we have these sort of intimate relationships, or these maybe like in some cases like sort of weird parasocial relationships with um, people who we don't even know if they're real,
Mhm.
like or if they are who they say they are, and um, that like sort of catfishing thing in sort of the early days of the internet. Sorry, my dog is being very needy right now. Was
All good.
was one of the like that was one of the earliest manifestations of that. But now, like you say, we're living in a world where we're actually being encouraged to develop these relationships with people that we know aren't real. Like
Right.
that's demented. How could we how could that possibly be a good idea?
Right.
It's uh
And even if somebody is real, like they are who they say they are as their account, there tends to be now a common question of, yeah, but who's paying you to say the things you're saying? Because
yeah.
you couldn't possibly be real saying that. Who's paying you to do that? And I mean, it's a valid question to ask when considering where things are coming from, if it's politicians or really even just media people with a big following, like there definitely is a sense of like or motivation to have certain um, perspectives and opinions based on who's who's giving you money, who's funding your project. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that's like one of the things that that Marco character is getting at in the book is like that, you know, if you decide that it doesn't matter, like if you decide that you're just gonna roll with it, then like um, if you're doing that online, I guess it asks to me the question that it presents is like to what extent are you also doing that in your real world relationships? Like to what extent
right,
are you um ignoring the reality of the people who are supposedly closest to you and turning them into some kind of projection of your own needs.
right,
Um, and so to what extent has like the internet just amplified to this exponential degree, like a tendency that we already have, which is to um, kind of dehumanize each other uh, in order to like meet our own needs.
right. Um, well, I think we're rounding out here. I want to give anybody else who has a question, you have a chance to throw it in there. I want to ask one last thing, which is sort of what you're working on now, or I don't know if there's anything you can talk about, but I'm really interested to see what's next for you.
Um, I'm trying to I'm working on a couple things, but it's just kind of like uh early phase, and I'm also kind of like rediscovering my process of writing fiction because I stopped doing it for a long time.
Mm,
Um, doing a lot of journalism, so I'm kind of remembering how I do it, like what my actual like like what happens when I'm sitting supposedly writing and like um what makes it so hard. So I'm kind of working that out, like trying to figure out if I can still do this and if I still want to and yeah, so that's sort of where I am now.
yeah, so a lot of the questions in the book are still the questions the narrator is dealing with in the book are still relevant in your life, it sounds like. What are
Yeah.
the what journalism do you or do you work on? I don't know.
So I've done a bunch of stuff, but mostly stuff around like social justice, environmental justice.
Mhm.
Did a long profile of the sister of a young man here who was killed in police custody in 2016. So I do that kind of thing. I also worked on uh, like true crime podcast about a French scammer,
Mm.
which was so much fun, and I got to work with a journalist I really admire.
What's it
And
called?
It's called Persona: The French
Okay.
Deception.
All right.
Um, yeah, it was great. It was, it was a lot of investigative work, a lot of getting, you know, documents slipped to you on a thumb drive and stuff like that. It was kind of
Right.
exciting and like, um, yeah. And then like, I did with some colleagues here. I got a grant, and we did an investigation into like this use of this pesticide in the 20th century in the French West Indies, and like how long the government and the banana industry kind of covered up the impact of that, and like, yeah, stuff like that mostly.
Right.
But yeah, trying to get back into writing fiction. It's just turns out uh it's really hard.
Right. Well, it sounds
As
like
you
you've
know.
got a lot of really, interesting, but also, important stories that you're telling through journalism too. So I don't fault you for not having time to work on the novel. That
Mm,
sounds really productive.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This has been lovely. It was great to hear you read and to talk to you a little bit more about the book. Um, Anyone who has not picked it up, there's a link in the chat to get it from our website. And yeah, I just want to thank you again so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.